Good morning and welcome to the webinar, Is Your Business Sustainable? Sustainable Business and Sustainable Procurement in Nova Scotia. My name is Mark DeCamp and I'll be your moderator this morning. To begin, a few housekeeping items. The participants' control panel should be visible in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Questions can be entered at any time and will be answered at the end of the webinar. Please use the question panel to submit a question. The webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Public Tenders website along with a PDF of the slide deck. Note you are on mute, so we cannot hear you. Today's speakers will be Linda Rankin, Procurement Services, Nova Scotia Department of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism, and Solveig Madsen, Pollution Prevention, Nova Scotia Environment. And as mentioned, my name is Mark DeCamp, Procurement Service, Nova Scotia Economic and Rural Development and Tourism. At this point, we'll turn the presentation over to Linda Rankin to begin her talk.
Thanks, Mark. The presentation we'll be giving you today is an update of a session that Solveig and I did around the province in 2010, just after we launched the Sustainable Procurement Policy. At that time, we told you what sustainable procurement was probably going to look like. Now we're going to be able to give you some concrete examples about what we're actually doing with sustainable procurement. So for today's agenda, as we mentioned, the province is working towards sustainable procurement of all of our goods, services, and constructions. In this webinar, you'll learn what is sustainable procurement, what does it mean to my business when considering public tender opportunities, and how can my business become more sustainable. That'll be the section that Solveig will be delivering at the end. The province of Nova Scotia purchases over $1 billion of goods, services, and construction each year. With this level of purchasing in a province the size of Nova Scotia, that gives us a very large economic footprint and a large environmental footprint. How we purchase and what we purchase can have a huge impact on the environmental quality and the sustainable prosperity of the province. And because of these factors, we're interested in sustainable procurement. In 2008, as we were developing the policy, we consulted with environmental groups and our client departments, the greater public sector, academic groups, and businesses all over the province to get their opinions on our proposed policy direction. When we did these consultations in 2008, what business told us was they supported this policy direction, and they wanted to see government lead by example. Further, they also said the government needs to buy smarter and consider life cycle costs, that we should not set the bar too low, and that we should rigorously assess product and service claims to ensure that the products and services we're being offered are truly sustainable. And as we go forward and I describe what we're doing in sustainable procurement, you'll see that we're taking a lot of this feedback into account. So why sustainable procurement? Well, the benefits to government are clear. It offers us cost savings, it helps to reduce our environmental impact, it helps us to provide safer work environments for staff and for people coming into our buildings, provides benefits to the local economy, and it helps us provide opportunities for non-traditional vendors. At the end of this portion of the webinar, I'll be speaking about how sustainable procurement can benefit the businesses as well. As you can well imagine, government purchases a wide variety of goods and services in construction, so full implementation of the policy across all the categories of goods and services that we buy is going to take quite a while. What you see on the screen is our initial focus areas. We picked these areas because they're either on standing offer or they're areas where we spend quite a bit of money. We're also working on a number of unique large projects and adding sustainable criteria into them. For example, we completed earlier this spring a retrofit of all the provincial highway lightings by converting them from conventional lighting to LED lighting. And sustainability criteria was added into that project. What this means to you as vendors is if you're selling us goods or services in these target areas, you'll begin to see changes in the tenders that are coming out. So what are we considering? Well, sustainability and sustainable procurement are defined differently by different people. And if you read any of the business magazines or the newspaper, you'll see those terms used a lot, but everybody seems to be defining them a little bit differently. For us, we have the typical three-pillar approach. We're looking at the environmental impacts, the economic impacts, and the human or the social side impacts. And then within each of those pillars, we're looking at 9 key areas. And each one of these key areas relates to policy or legislative direction of government. Although we're trying to consider all 9 areas in each purchase, in reality, not every factor is included in each purchase. So what does this mean to you as vendors? Well, government purchasing practices are changing. We're starting with the large government-wide standing offers and selected large projects, as I said. We're considering the attributes of products and services that'll help us achieve best value overall rather than lowest price. In a lot of cases, we're relying on third-party certification, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And we're considering added value and sustainable delivery of large projects. So if you're bidding on a large RFP, you may see questions like, how is this project going to be delivered sustainably? So let's start by looking at the considerations in a little more detail. Coming up, I have slides giving examples of each one of these things, but we'll start with the economic pillar. One of the big things we're looking at is life cycle costing. We've learned over the years that the purchase price is only a small portion of the total cost of owning something that we purchase. Life cycle costing is being used for equipment that will be used for a while, that requires regular maintenance, that requires power or fuel supply, and that uses consumable parts and supplies. And vendors will be asked for life cycle costing data for certain types of products that we're purchasing, and we're using this approach already in our tenders. A good example of this is LED traffic signals. When you look at the initial purchase price, you see quite a difference. The LED traffic bulb is much more expensive than the conventional light bulb. But when you look at it over the typical 7-year life cycle of a traffic signal, you see quite a difference. The purchase price really doesn't reflect the total cost of ownership of this type of technology. And life cycle costing applies very well to all kinds of things. Other types of lighting signals, the highway lights like I mentioned, IT purchases, heavy equipment purchases, and so on. Another piece of our economic picture is our local economic impact. So in this area, we're looking at making sure all local vendors can compete when given the tender and the specifications. We're making sure that local vendors are aware of tender opportunities when they're advertised and that they understand our processes. We're working with local vendors to build capacity, and we're assisting non-traditional vendors to do business with government. And a lot of this is coming together in activities like the vendor training. For example, if you're in the consulting or service field, you probably saw and hopefully participated in one of our bid prep series last year. We're also doing reverse trade shows, webinars such as this one, and putting all manner of information up on our website. On the environmental side, we're focusing on toxics use reduction, waste reduction, and greenhouse gas reduction. And as you're probably all aware, these 3 areas of interest relate to government policy and legislation. As part of this, we're working very closely with Nova Scotia Environment to make sure that our purchasing decision supports the regulatory requirements. As a vendor, you may be asked for things like third-party certifications, product with recycled content, products with no or reduced levels of hazardous chemicals, products that use less water or energy, products with reduced or reusable or locally recyclable packaging. And the last 2 on here are really big ones for us. Products with long warranty periods and support for legacy products, vendors that support legacy products, and products that can be reconfigured to meet our changing needs. The reason these attributes are important to us is government has a very robust surplusing system. And that system allows us to move product like chairs and tables and cubicles and material like that throughout our system to where it's needed as we open offices and close offices and reconfigure workspaces. If we can continue to use these types of products in our system, then it reduces waste overall. Just to give you an idea, some of the things I'm talking about may sound like they're very small things. For example, we changed our paper tender in 2009. And really, overall, it wasn't a very big change, or at least it didn't look like it. We moved to requiring FSC or SFI certified paper and a minimum 30% recycled content. But because government is such a large purchaser of paper, and because we use so much paper, this had a huge environmental impact. For white copy paper, for 9 months, going to a paper with recycled content saved over 300 tons of CO2 emissions. And you can see at the bottom what this equates to in real terms that you might be more familiar with. So it's the equivalent of taking 10 garbage truck loads of garbage off the road, or 10 fewer acres of trees cut down, or the CO2 emissions equivalent to taking 59 cars off the road. All of that coming from a small change in our paper specification. By the way, if you want to calculate the environmental impacts for the papers you use in your own operations, at the very bottom of that slide there was a reference to a paper calculator, and you can put your own paper use into that and calculate your own impacts. On the greenhouse gas side, Nova Scotia government is an Energy Star participant, and what that means is whenever possible, the products that we're purchasing must meet or exceed the current year's Energy Star specifications. If you want to see what the current year's specifications are for a particular type of product, you can find them on the NRCan site. So moving on to the social considerations. Social considerations are really a mixed bag of issues for us, affecting everything from our staff to our contractors to the public in Nova Scotia. The social side of things is a little harder for us to get our head around. We deal with the typical things like occupational health and safety and indoor air quality, ergonomics of our furniture and our setups for our staff, and accessibility of our buildings and our facilities. We also deal with broader issues such as fair wage, fair trade, and we work with non-traditional vendors and try and derive community benefits from our purchasing. Some of the things you'll see on the health and safety side, for example, are toxics use reduction, reducing the toxic materials in products that have the potential to impact indoor air quality and therefore impact our workers and people coming into our buildings. And you may see things like requirements for reduced levels of particular identified toxins such as flame retardants, and also requirements for reduced or no fragrances, odor, and dyes, which are often unnecessary chemicals added to the products that we're purchasing, and some of them can be potentially harmful. And as I said, we're looking at accessibility and ergonomic issues, making sure that all of our products that we purchase can be set up and configured to suit the needs of staff of various levels of sizes, body types, abilities, and needs. So what about services? We've been talking an awful lot about the products we buy and how sustainability is applied to the products, but we're also looking at requiring sustainable services. When we're looking at the service side of things, we go about things a little differently. We ask the vendors if they operate in a sustainable manner, and we do this through the use of a proponent sustainability assessment. The assessment must be completed, and in many cases it's actually posted on our website for our departmental buyers to look at when they're selecting their service provider. The idea behind the assessment, it asks questions about how you run your business and how you state your position on sustainability and what have you. And the idea behind the assessment is that vendors operating in a sustainable manner can bring that knowledge to the job that they're doing for us. If you're not operating in a sustainable manner yourself, then chances are you don't really get sustainability and you're not going to be bringing it to the work you're doing for us. So it includes questions on all kinds of things like your sustainability policy or commitment or vision, your use of sustainable criteria in your own purchasing, how you work with other local businesses and suppliers, how you treat your staff in terms of training and mentorship opportunities, your OSH programs and practices, those types of things. So I've talked a lot about how sustainable purchasing is going to benefit government, but being sustainable has a lot of benefits for businesses as well. And Solveig is going to go into this in a lot more detail. But just to kind of give you some context, in a recent study done by the UN in 2011, 93% of CEOs believe that sustainability issues will be critical to the future success of their businesses. Sustainability in your operations offers real, tangible benefits. And the big players get this. And if you read the business publications, you'll see various profiles highlighting their efforts. But the big players like P&G and Coke and PepsiCo, they're all looking at sustainability as a way to plan for future resource constraints. Everything from limited quantities of water or raw materials to looking at carbon footprinting. So on the slide here, you see some benefits to large and small businesses both, in terms of benefiting your bottom line, increasing the efficiency of your business and reducing waste, because we all know waste costs money, addressing your consumer demands, and a big one these days, attracting and retaining younger workers, especially those born after 1989. And we see study after study saying younger workers want to work in a work environment that where they feel like they're doing good and they feel the work environment mirrors their own thoughts and feelings towards society and the environment and all of those things. So when you create that kind of workspace, you're much more likely to attract younger workers. On a global scale, we see this kind of effect. This slide is comparing the Dow Jones Sustainability Index to the Dow Jones Stock Index. The Sustainability Index is green and the Dow Jones Index is in gray. And it's looking at those indexes through the last economic downturn. And you can see how the sustainable companies perform better regardless of the economic climate. Sustainability is just a way to insulate your business against economic issues as well. So I'd like to leave you with some final thoughts. Many businesses are learning to talk about sustainability, and really if you talk about it properly, it's marketing gold. I work with a lot of public purchasers in large and small institutions, within government, and I speak to those in private industry. And we're all talking about sustainable purchasing, and we're all talking about what sustainability looks like. So even though you may not be seeing requests for that type of information in everybody's tenders just yet, it's out there and people are interested. The key things as a business that you need to communicate is your mission or your value with respect to sustainability, and highlight your concrete attributes by making specific statements about how your product or service is sustainable. It's getting to be a pretty savvy marketplace now, and people are not that interested in vague statements about how green a company is, or pretty little logos on packaging and things like that that don't really have any real meaning behind them. Finally, if you're looking for more information on how to do business with government, our supplier development program can help you out. They provide businesses with better access and better knowledge about publicly funded procurement opportunities through their outreach and education programs, and they're also available for email questions or site visits or explanations of specifications or all kinds of other things that can help you out. So if you want to learn more, I would encourage you to contact them, and their email is listed at the bottom of the slide. So that concludes my portion of the presentation. We've asked people, or we've mentioned we'll hold off responding to questions until the end of the webinar, but please feel free to type your questions in if you have any. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Solveig Madsen from Nova Scotia Environment, and she's going to talk about how you can make your business more sustainable.
Thank you, Linda, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to participate in the webinar. So I will be elaborating on the three environmental areas that Linda has mentioned as being part of the environmental pillar of the Sustainable Procurement Policy. You will remember that the other two pillars of sustainable procurement are economic and the social aspects. But first, before getting into those three environmental aspects, I just wanted to support Linda's statements about environmental performance being part of doing business as well as it providing business benefits. If we take a pollution, or if you take a proactive pollution prevention approach, you can save money and you can make your business more profitable. So by improving your environmental performance, you can improve your marketability and possibly also your competitiveness. I'll encourage you to look at the environmental activities on the slide. And I know that they're not new to you. I know that we've always heard about reducing waste and water efficiency and waste reduction and so on. But don't just think of them as being ways to improve your environmental performance. Look at them as also cost-saving opportunities for your business. And the other thing that I'd like to note is quite often there are easy things that you can do as a business that will improve your environmental performance as well as save you money. And I'll use the Mountain Equipment Co-op store here in Halifax as an example. They did some very straightforward things in order to reduce their energy consumption, and they were able to save about 29% off of their energy consuming bills, whether it's electricity or heating bills and so on. And what they did, they basically reduced their heating and cooling settings on thermostats. They closed their doors between shipments of goods coming in and shipments going out. And they installed motion sensors on lights in rooms that were not used regularly, rooms basically that were only being used periodically. As well, in addition to these sort of easy things that they did in order to improve their energy, or energy performance, they also diverted about 97% of their waste away from landfill sites. And this all happened because of a commitment from management as well as from staff. So that's all it takes, is some commitment and a little bit of extra effort. So getting into the first of the three environmental focus areas, greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases are primarily produced from the burning of fossil fuels. Concentrations of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases increase in the atmosphere, and this traps the energy produced by the sun and causes our planet to warm. The effect of the rise in global temperatures differs depending on where you are, and the change in the average weather that a region experiences is called climate change. So what are the effects of climate change? They could be ecological, economic, and there will also be social implications. So on the slide you'll see some effects that will be happening in Nova Scotia. You may have heard some of these on media reports already. But we will be experiencing hurricanes and tropical storms that are stronger due to warming ocean temperatures, and this can cause obviously property damage and can affect public safety. Property owners, especially of shoreline properties, may be affected by land loss due to erosion. And an economic consideration, changing ocean temperatures will change the geographic distribution of fish stocks. So if our fishing industry is not able to adapt quickly enough, there could be detrimental effects there as well. So these are just a few of the known and yet to be discovered effects here in Nova Scotia. So what is the Nova Scotia government doing? We've set goals to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and our goal is 10%, to reduce our emissions by 10% below the 1990 levels, and we want to do this by 2020. And I just wanted to point out as well that as we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by decreasing the burning of fossil fuels, there's also an added benefit. We're also reducing pollutants in our air, whether it be nitrous oxides, sulfur oxides, and also particulate matter. So there's an additional benefit there. So is this important to your business? I would suggest that as awareness increases and as sustainable procurement gains greater hold, you'll be asked further questions about your carbon footprint or about your greenhouse gas inventory. So it is something that businesses have to be aware of. Greenhouse gas inventory is usually expressed as tons of carbon dioxide equivalent over a 1-year period. And the scope could be your entire facility or facilities, or it may only include part of a production process. The scope, it could include direct emissions, or could include could also include indirect emissions. Your direct emissions are those emissions that you are in direct control of. It could be fuel that you're using for heating of your building, for instance. And indirect emissions are those that you are not in complete control of, such as shipping of raw materials to your facility or the electricity that you use. Now, of course, you can control the amount of electricity you use, but you cannot always control the source of the electricity, whether it's from a renewable resource or non-renewable. So in addition to questions related to your greenhouse gas inventory or your carbon footprint, you may also be asked about what you're doing to reduce your greenhouse gases. So for example, Walmart has asked its suppliers not only what are your total greenhouse gases, but also what are your targets for reduction. So what can you do? How can you reduce your greenhouse gas emissions? You might want to consider your building. Are there lighting retrofits that you can do to more energy efficient lighting? Programmable thermostats, for instance, can also affect your energy consumption. You might want to consider your manufacturing process, or if you're working primarily in an office type setting, there are activities in an office type setting that you can control as well. Ask your employees what they would suggest. Quite often, the best suggestions do come from your employees, and it also builds commitment with your staff. Consider energy efficiency when you're buying new equipment. So there's probably very easy ways that you can improve your environmental footprint. And remember the Mountain Equipment Co-op example that I mentioned earlier, and the easy things that they were able to do, and they saved 30% off of their energy consumption. So this slide shows a number of resources or tools that are available for Nova Scotia businesses. And I would encourage you to look at the Nova Scotia Carbon Footprint Calculator. It's a tool that can help you calculate your greenhouse gas inventory, and it uses an internationally recognized method. This carbon calculator was produced through the Eco-Efficiency Center at Dalhousie University. And I would suggest that you look at it right away and use it right away in order to develop a baseline, and from there you can measure any reductions in activities that you do in the future. Efficiency Nova Scotia is a relatively new nonprofit corporation which has a number of energy efficiency and conservation programs. So I would recommend any business to have a look at those programs that can assist business. And if you're interested in knowing more about what Nova Scotia government is doing, have a look at the Nova Scotia Climate Change Action Plan. So the second environmental focus area is solid waste reduction. In 1995, you might remember that we set a waste diversion goal of 50% to be achieved by the year 2000. We did achieve this goal. And we did this primarily by diverting waste resources that would typically go to dumps or landfill sites, and we diverted those into recycling and compost streams. We have a new target now, and it's significant. The new target is an additional 37% reduction by the year 2015. So you'll be hearing more about ways that we would encourage business and individuals in Nova Scotia to reduce further. So as mentioned, we focused on diverting waste resources into recycling and composting streams as a way to reduce our waste. But we also have to remember to reduce our waste as well. Recycling is important, but we really need to do a better job by eliminating and reducing the waste and recyclables. And why do I say that? Recycling consumes energy and resources, so if we can reduce or eliminate waste in the first place, we're so much further ahead. So if you think of it even in your facility, handling and getting rid of waste and recyclables costs you money, whether it be in storage or tipping fees and so on. So it's better not to create the waste in the first place. So as a business, where can you start in terms of reducing your waste? I would suggest to do a waste audit. Now this may sound fairly formal and daunting, but it can be as easy as looking at the dumpsters in behind your building and seeing what's there. This will give you an idea of what your priorities should be or could be. For instance, if you're a manufacturing facility, it might be offcuts that you're finding that there's quite an amount in your dumpster that you may want to look at various uses for or to decrease those offcuts. Or it might be packaging from raw material shipments. Or if you're an office type setting, it could be office paper that is ending up in your trash bins. So in our office, we did a waste audit a number of years ago now, and what we found was that our organics were ending up in the trash, and of course that's not where they should be going. They should be going into a compost stream, so we've made efforts to improve our performance there. So as I've mentioned, it doesn't matter what type of business you are, there are opportunities to reduce waste. Consulting firms can reduce paper use, and they can hold green meetings with no disposables. If you're having coffee being brought in, you might want to supply ceramic mugs rather than using disposable mugs, for instance. Product manufacturers can ensure raw materials are used efficiently, and they can also consider using post-consumer recycled materials within their processes. And as manufacturers, also remember that the products that you produce can have an impact in terms of creating solid waste. So ask yourself whether or not your products are durable and whether or not they're repairable, or do they end up in landfill sites soon after they are purchased. Linda touched on these aspects of durability and repairability in her presentation as well as being important to sustainable procurement for the province. Another aspect you might want to look at is packaging. Do you need to use as much packaging? Or can the packaging at the very least be easily recycled? Or you might want to consider packaging that can be returned to you and reused. For instance, cabinets can sometimes be wrapped in blankets that can be returned and reused again. So this slide shows some resources, again, that are available for Nova Scotia businesses. Under the Resource Recovery Fund Board, you'll notice two items, one being community educators, which I would encourage you to take advantage of. They will send somebody into your workplace and explain how waste can be properly sorted and give you other advice as well concerning the recycling of materials and possibly also waste reduction. The Resource Recovery Fund Board also has funding opportunities that support the development of value-added products from materials recovered from the waste stream. So there are four projects for businesses wanting to do something with items that may have traditionally ended up in your waste stream, and you want to produce a new product from that. They can provide up to 50% funding for that project. As well, there's a student research grant. If you're interested in working with students in terms of value-added products, there's a grant of up to $15,000 that is available. And the third and final focus area that I'll be covering is hazardous and toxic chemicals. Toxic chemicals are those that can have a long-term harmful effect to the environment, and part of the environment, of course, is human health. They may be persistent in the environment. They could bioaccumulate in tissues and organs of organisms. Some may be carcinogenic, and some may have detrimental effects on hormone activity. Over the last number of years, there has been an increased amount of attention on chemicals, especially toxic chemicals. And this is due to improved detection equipment. As well, there's been more and more studies that are showing chemicals being found in the environment and within our own bodies as well. And other studies are showing that there are detrimental effects at very low concentrations of these toxic chemicals. So there is cause to be concerned. So due to these concerns, the federal government has initiated a chemical management plan, and they've also completed a biomonitoring study which has involved 5,000 Canadians. And we are finding, or they have found, chemicals within bodies and tissue, the tissue in Canadians. So this study will establish a baseline of chemicals in the Canadian population and will help identify priority chemicals that need to be further studied, and there may need to be future regulatory action against those chemicals. So as a business, as the concern increases, there could be more and more questions asked of business, and there could be additional regulations that could affect Nova Scotia businesses as well. So do you think your business is using potentially harmful chemicals? I think most of us quite often think of chemical products being used by manufacturers or being used by particular industry sectors such as metal refinishers or auto body repair and processes such as those. But actually, most if not all businesses are using products or equipment that contain toxic chemicals. For example, most companies are using computers and IT equipment, and most of these do contain toxic metals and other substances as well. And janitorial products can contain harmful chemicals. Some of them contain respiratory irritants or skin irritants, and some others also contain possible carcinogens. So there are some areas to be concerned with. So for computers and IT equipment, you might want to look into EPEAT-rated equipment. And for janitorial products, you may want to ask your janitorial provider, janitorial service providers, to use environmentally certified products. So if you are a business that's using significant amounts of hazardous or toxic chemicals, you may want to look into having a chemical management plan. And by having a chemical management plan, you can start to understand what your risks are. And you can also start to understand where and how you could incorporate best management practices into your business. And this, of course, will reduce your risk. I'll just mention a fairly recent survey of Nova Scotian companies that we conducted together with the Eco-Efficiency Centre at Dalhousie University. And this was one where we talked to a number of companies from sectors that typically use a significant amount of chemicals. And it revealed that it was about 60% actually have chemical management plans. And at the outset, I was actually thinking, well, that's not too bad. That's 60% is more than half. But when you consider that also means that 40% of businesses that use chemicals on a regular basis don't have a plan. So this seems to suggest that there are a lot of businesses out there that are not completely understanding potentially what their risks are when they're handling these chemicals and how they might be able to improve their performance. So in addition to having a chemical management plan and understanding what's happening in your business, what are some of the best practices that companies can adopt? Businesses can substitute toxic chemicals with non-toxic or less toxic substances. You can look at reducing the amount of potentially harmful chemicals that you use. You can look at reusing and recycling harmful chemicals. And a big one is preventing spills. There are many ways that you can incorporate practices and equipment into your business that will prevent spills from happening and releases into the environment. And we have to remember that when we're talking about hazardous and toxic chemicals, we're not only talking about environmental effects, but it also very much has an impact on the occupational health and safety of the workers in your business, which is obviously of great importance to your business and to everyone here in Nova Scotia. And the final aspect, of course, with hazardous chemicals is to ensure proper treatment and disposal of those substances. So I've mentioned that the federal government has initiated a chemical management plan due to the concerns of the potential harmful effects to the environment and human health from toxic chemicals. Approximately 4,000 substances have been deemed to require further screening, that they are considered to be harmful, and they may actually be added to the toxic list in the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, or there may be additional regulations that need to be enacted, or they may actually be banned from use here in Canada. And Linda has already noted that the Sustainable Procurement initiative here in Nova Scotia is looking at the Canadian Environmental Protection Act toxic list in consideration of the products that they purchase, and they will also be aware of upcoming federal regulations that will control toxic chemicals here in Canada. I'll just mention a couple of the pieces of federal legislation that have been enacted in the last little while that can affect businesses here in Nova Scotia. The VOC reduction regulations for automotive refinishing products and architectural coatings, cosmetic regulations which restrict or prohibit substances within cosmetic products and also require certain types of labeling. Chromium electroplating regulations will affect some metal finishers. And there's been a great deal of media attention on toys and the toxic chemicals that have been found in some of the coating products. So my final slide basically outlines some of the resources that relate to hazardous chemicals. You might want to look into Canada's Chemical Management Plan. A great source of information is your industry or business associations. They typically know what's happening and what is being talked about in terms of environmental regulations. And you can also look at environmental certification programs and other lists of chemicals of concern. And the last resource, the Nova Scotia Hazardous Chemical Toolkit, was produced here in Nova Scotia, and it includes tips for businesses as well as lists of regulations and links to other resources. So it's kind of a one-stop shopping for businesses who may have some concerns about hazardous chemicals that they are using in their facility. So if you need help, there's some people listed there that will provide you with additional information. Their contact information is provided. So that concludes my presentation, and I will turn things back to Mark in order to facilitate the question and answer period.
Thank you, Solveig. So for the attendees, you may use the question panel. If your screen has disappeared on the right, you could hit the orange arrow to open up your question dialog box. Type your question, hit send, and we'll start to roll in. So while you're typing, I just want to do a quick summary of the key points. Many procurement decisions now consider the full cost along with environmental and social impacts. As a vendor, you may be asked to respond to questions related to these items. Understand environmental aspects and how to reduce greenhouse gases, solid waste, and hazardous and toxic chemicals in your business. There are a lot of resources for Nova Scotia companies wanting to improve their environmental performance. We have one question that came in. just pulling it up. So the question says, I think we as business owners need to also look at country of origin of what we are purchasing and the carbon footprint of buying from China, for example. Seems to be more common.
And that's a little further down the path of sustainable procurement than we are right now. We're not at the point of looking at carbon footprinting per se in terms of requesting that information in our tenders. That's not to say that might not be someplace we go in the future. And certainly from a business standpoint, it's a very important attribute. And also a lot of the large private industries are looking very hard at carbon footprinting and greenhouse gas contribution in their own supply chain. So maybe not so much on the public purchasing side yet, but definitely an important consideration to private industry.
So that's a good comment. That's a very good comment. I encourage you to type your questions in if you have any other questions. We have one more. Is there a process in place to verify life cycle costs specifically for high tech?
Not to verify them. What we typically ask the providers for is one of two things. We'll ask them for the raw information, and we'll calculate the life cycle costs ourselves. So we'll ask things like frequency of maintenance, cost of repair parts, cost of ongoing supplies, and we'll do the calculations ourselves. Or we'll ask you for life cycle costing scenarios of various products to help us make the decision. The other way we use life cycle costing is at the very front end of the process, as you saw with the traffic signals and with the LED highway lighting, is before we even made the decision of which direction we were going in, we did life cycle costing and business cases for all of the options that were out there for different types of technology, and then decided what we were actually going to tender for. So that's basically our process right now. In terms of verification, I'm not sure anybody out there can certify your life cycle costing. I'm not quite sure how we would actually verify it, other than asking you to submit your costs, as they are to the best of your knowledge.
Thanks for that answer. Thanks for the question. We're just checking to see if there's any more questions coming in.
Maybe too early in the morning for folks. You might need that second cup of coffee before you get your heads around all of this. It was a lot of information. You've got Solvay's and my email in the presentation. We've also got a sustainable procurement mailbox at susproc@gov.ns.ca. So if any questions occur to you later in the day, or later this morning, or whenever, please feel free to get a hold of us. We'll do our best to answer them, and Solvay has given you a number of resources. And the slide deck will be on our website if you want to go back and look at some of those resources later.
Sure. The last question that came in was related to the availability of the presentation. And as Linda said, it will be uploaded to the gov.ns.ca/tenders website very quickly. So we're going to wrap up there. Just one last important point. We have an in-house sustainability calculator, and by participating in today's webinar, instead of a classroom-based event, we had 17 participants signed up, which included 11 people from HRM. We saved $1,456 in travel costs, and we have reduced our greenhouse gas contribution by 1,189 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent. So we should all be proud of ourselves, and we're working on a very important webinar-based initiative. Not to mention travel time as well. Yes, that's a good point. So there are the emails. Thank you very much for participating, and have a good day.